Hi everyone, Alexandra Jarrett, Jupiter Returns here with your weekly astrology forecast for the week of April the 27th to 5th of May 2020. Already we're heading into May. I hope you're well, I hope you're safe, I hope you're not too frustrated with matters of our sort of enclosure at the moment. Hopefully my videos are bringing you some insight into how to use the time well. It's an important resource is time, and that's going to be something that all of our resources is something that it's going to be put into focus. How we value the resources that we have is something that's coming under the spotlight with the Venus retrograde process that we've kind of started. Venus isn't retrograde yet, she's in shadow, but the process is something that we're being invited into. If you haven't yet watched it, do check out my Venus retrograde in Gemini video, and that should give you some pointers. And we'll be touching in on that again today as Venus makes an important aspect. So it's an interesting week, an important week. It's the very last week that we're going to have the lunar nodes, the nodes of the moon, in their current position, which is in the signs of the North Node is currently in Cancer and the South Node there in Capricorn. So where the nodes move through the chart is where we see the most fated events taking place, most karmic, destined events. We generally, very generally, associate the South Node with endings and moving away from something, whereas the North Node tends to indicate moving towards something or incorporating more of that into our world. My cat Benson has decided to help me today. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so here he is helping me. So they've been here for around about 18 months to 2 years. The nodes will spend that much time in each sign, and that's where the eclipses take place, which are these big trigger points. Now, when we think back to when all this current crisis started, when we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, that was exactly a day after, a matter of hours essentially, after the last eclipse of these two nodes, of these signs. And that was essentially when this crisis really kind of took off. So they do have a close association with very fated events. So where they're going to be headed next week is into the signs of Gemini. North Node will move into Gemini and the South Node will move into Sagittarius. And we're already starting to feel some changes in those directions. It's going to be a time when, if we're considering just very kind of broadly speaking, the South Node being moving away from things or integrating what we've already experienced in that place so that we can have more experience over in the North Node. Sagittarius then is the sign of, it's big, essentially. This is a sign that's ruled by Jupiter. It loves long distance travel. It wants to travel the whole globe. It wants to take in everything that it can. It wants to learn lots, and it wants to develop a belief structure. It wants to develop a personal philosophy. So it's very much related to education of the higher mind. The opposite sign, therefore, Gemini, where we're going to see a bit more of, Gemini rules more local travel. So short distance travel, it's our own neighborhood, it's our own local area. And it's also to do with education and knowledge, this whole axis is, but this is more, rather than the grand philosophical ideals of Sagittarius, Gemini is more interested in the detail. Gemini is a sign that's ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is very discerning. Mercury wants things done on quite a minute level in terms of order and practicality. Gemini rules the pairs in the body, so it rules the arms and the hands. It wants to learn a new skill, wants to learn a new language, wants to learn something that's very practical and something that can be used in the immediate life. So it's moving away from these grand ideals and beliefs and broad-ranging kind of philosophical debates and long-distance travel where we're incorporating things that we've experienced within other cultures and other religions. And it's moving more into, well, okay, I actually need to pay more attention to my immediate surroundings and what's going on a more of a local basis, and develop skills that are more useful to me in the here and the now. So we're going to see an increase in emphasis on those things. And of course, the lockdown and the current crisis situation fits in perfectly with this. We don't have long distance travel right now. And I think that world is going to be, you know, not as it was for some time to come, certainly as the nodes are continuing their journey through these signs. We're going to see more travel as the lockdown eases in our local area, more day trips, more staycations, more, you know, I've seen it already, people wanting to fulfill the holiday vibe by camping out in their back garden, for example, things like that, you know. How can I kind of scratch the itch, but in a more immediate and local way? Also, Gemini rules communication, and it involves logistics, so parcel deliveries and postal services, and you know, local delivery services. All of these things are the things that are going to be getting a real boost at this time because of the crisis situation. So we can see how we're already being pulled into that energy and preparation. But for the time being, it is the very last week that the nodes are in this sign, the signs of Cancer and Capricorn. We get the opportunity to integrate the learnings of Capricorn, the learnings of, you know, the experiences we've had around capitalism and material growth in our world, and what that's taught us, and now where we need to move more towards understanding the more Cancerian approach to life, which is more about the feeling nature, more about the personal, the humanness, the very kind of, we're seeing, for example, at the moment, working from home, Capricorn, Cancer. Lots of people are now having to do this. And we're getting these wonderful insights into people, you know, just even watching the news or something on TV, and we're actually being able to see into people's homes. We're getting an insight into more about them on a personal level. You know, Capricorn can, to a certain extent, dehumanize the human experience. It can make it very rational, very practical, very, you know, unemotive, whereas Cancer's quite the opposite. So these are the things that we're starting to see. We're starting to understand people as other human beings just like us. And one of the wonderful examples we have of this at the moment in our country, in the UK here, is Boris Johnson. Now, a very interesting time for Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson's own North Node is at 2 degrees of Cancer, exactly underneath the transitive North Node. When we have the nodes making aspect to nodes in your own chart, or the person's chart that we're looking at, this indicates a very fated time. So during the time that the transiting node was crossing the Prime Minister's own natal node, this has been an experience for him that's been very important in terms of his own destiny. And as the node moves on into Gemini, he actually has his Sun and Venus right at the end of Gemini. So they're going to come under the nodal influence very soon as well. So one wonders what this experience of him and the country recognizing him more as, rather than this, what he stands for, but actually as a human being in his own right, a fallible human being, a human being that has weaknesses, a human being that is ill and faces some of the challenges that the rest of us experience. Just as an example there of more of the humanizing aspect that we can see. Also, we need to bear in mind, this is very interesting, that as the nodes move into Gemini, Gemini is where we have the Venus retrograde taking place. And as I've mentioned before, so I won't go on about it too much, but you know, this really is an important time where we have some reflection on our value system. When planets go retrograde, they're really inviting us to have quite a deep journey with them, to spend more time acknowledging their influence in our life and understanding how we're currently processing that energy, and therefore how we might like to do that differently going forwards if we kind of embrace the opportunity. Now, this weekend, as you may have experienced in your life, we had the planet Pluto, a big part of the current crisis. Pluto actually went retrograde. So I'm going to change that up to red now to indicate the planet is now retrograde. This took place on Saturday. I talked about this in last week's video, but essentially it means that we were under quite an intense hit of Pluto energy, that very potent, powerful, intense kind of energy. We had difficult aspect that it was making with Mercury over there in Aries, and this led to, particularly on Saturday, some quite challenging conversations with people. Pluto currently paired up with Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, and Jupiter is all about our beliefs and our philosophies, our personal philosophies. Pluto is now retrograding back, and will go all the way back to 22 degrees Capricorn. And if you know your astrology, if you've been following me for a while, or other astrologers even, you will know that's a really important degree. 22 degrees of Capricorn is the degree that we had the Pluto-Saturn conjunction back in mid-January, which is what kicked off this whole crisis. The Great Pause, it's being called quite aptly. Retrograde now, it will go all the way back to that degree and activate it again. So if you have personal planets or angles or points in your chart around that degree, and you experience that very, very powerful hit of astrological influence in your own life, as we moved through the latter part of 2019 and into early 2020, it's likely that you would have felt it more profoundly as Pluto stationed this weekend and will now recover that ground. Essentially, it's really trying to ram the message home. It's saying, okay, Pluto is all about death and rebirth. It's all about transformation. It's saying, okay, you know, there was a purpose to all of this. Let's not lose sight of the fact that this is creating a deep, deep, long-lasting change. And that has to happen on an individual level if it's going to happen on a collective level. I think one of the things that I've observed about human nature in my time, both personally and professionally, is that people don't like empty space. On the whole, human beings don't like gaps. Okay, it's part of human nature to want to fill space with something. We don't like the void, the chasm. It represents some kind of chaos to us. And so it's important for us, we feel almost like a compulsive need to fill space with something, whether that be a silence within a conversation, whether that be, you know, a blank piece of earth in our garden, you know, oh, it's crying out for a new plant there. You know, you can apply it to so many different aspects of life. And where there are unknowns, which is precisely what we have here, a massive unknown, Pluto and Jupiter. Jupiter wants to know everything. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius. It's all about learning and teaching, but it wants to know everything, Jupiter, Pluto. And the problem is that where there is this gap in understanding at the moment, this powerful space, this pause that we have, it can be very tempting just to fill that with something, because then it's kind of like, it feels safer. It doesn't feel like some void that's going to suck us in, some chasm of nothingness. And so it can be very tempting at this time to just think, okay, like one of those children's toys, this shape will fit into this hole, therefore that's what should happen. And the problem is at this time is that there's just not enough that's known. Remember, Jupiter doesn't operate at its best in Capricorn, just doesn't give us the best aspect of itself, the best influence of Jupiter. So here we're more likely to see the downsides of that. So we really need to just get comfortable, I think, with not knowing. Be accepting of the fact that nobody really knows. And if anyone appears at this time like they do know the truth, they probably don't. You know, probably someone does, but you know, somewhere at some point. But I don't think until this retrograde, both of these planets are going to be going retrograde. Till these retrogrades are finished, we're really not going to have anything like the full understanding of what's going on here. So my advice would be to just hold space for not knowing. Don't try and fill that gap with a desperate attempt to have some safety and control over the situation. All right, just get comfortable and familiar and okay with space. And you'll find that that's actually a really good life skill that you can apply later down the line as well. So Pluto retrograde, with obviously takes a long time for Pluto to build up some speed into that retrograde. So lots of Pluto influence around still as we move into this week. So the big news for today, Monday the 27th of April and into Tuesday, we have the planet Mercury. Mercury has been moving through the sign of Aries and is now ingressing Taurus later on today. Mercury is the sign of information, communication, travel. It's the ruler of both Gemini and Virgo, so closely related to those two things. Also related to healing and health as well. In the sign of Aries, you know, Aries is rash. Aries can be very self-focused. It can be quite impulsive. So there's been a lot of thinking, speaking before we think, really, that we've experienced with Mercury moving through Aries, and especially in these challenging square aspects to those powerful planets happening over there in Capricorn. So I'm glad to see that this is, you know, coming out of Aries, where there's been a little bit too much force with Aries. As always, it depends on the starting point. If you're the sort of person who has possibly, you know, debilitated Mercury in your chart, or you're not very good at communicating on behalf of the self, if you're someone that doesn't really speak up for yourself or fight your own corner, then you may have found that this Mercury journey through Aries has allowed you to have a little bit more assertiveness. On the flip side, if you've got really strong Mercury in your chart and you're full of Mercury influence already, then it might have just tipped the balance a little bit too far, and you might have just been a little bit potentially overbearing in your communication style, or possibly even aggressive. You know, assertion is great up to a point, and then it becomes aggression. So a calming down, you know, as Mercury moves into Taurus, Taurus is very grounded, it's slow. Taurus doesn't do anything fast. It's a very kind of heavy, steady, stable energy. So Mercury will pick up on some of that. However, like we had last week when the Sun first moved into Taurus, the first aspect that Mercury is going to find itself making will be a challenge aspect, a Saturn square. So Mercury here is going to find itself coming up against the authority of Saturn. So it might feel like there's been some restriction placed on your ability to speak in some way or another, or your ability to communicate or to move around. And I suppose we've all got bucket loads of that going on. But there might be some kind of consequence, some repercussions around your style of communication, how you've been expressing that. So it's a challenging time as Mercury first moves into Taurus. Mercury is now moving very, very close to the sun. That gives it even more challenge. Basically, Mercury is coming into what we call combust, or it's actually already combust. It's going to be cazimi the sun, which essentially means that we don't get the best expression of Mercury because the influence of the sun's powerful rays are blocking out Mercury's kind of vibe from reaching us. I talked about this in last week's video, so check that out if you have that natally. But that's going to be a challenge. Then, of course, it's going to meet up with Uranus as well. So a bit of a bumpy ride as it starts the journey through Taurus, and then as it comes out, eventually we'll get a more grounded and stable feel to things. The other really important aspects that Mercury is making today, as it moves into Taurus, is a harmonious, easy flow of energy called a trine over there to the south node, and that gives us a sextile over to the north node, which is a sextile is essentially half of a trine. So whereas a trine allows unhindered receptivity between these 2 points, so the south node and Mercury, energy can flow easily between these two. They can communicate with each other in really easy ways. With the sextile, it's easy energy, but it's not quite as easy as a trine, so it requires us to put a little bit of effort in. You have to kind of meet the energy halfway to get the best out of the sextile aspect. So it's a more active aspect. I love sextiles. I think they're really, probably shouldn't have a favorite aspect, but if I did, it would be the sextile. So what's this telling us? This is telling us that the lessons that we've learned, the information that we've learned, our lessons about our communication and processing of knowledge and information that we've been experiencing since January. You know, Mercury in January was right back there in the middle of that big event that we had. So it's moved all the way around, and it's kind of saying, okay, what have I learned about my time in Capricorn? And then how can I apply that lesson to pull me into the future that I want to align with? A future that's more about care, a future that's more emotional, more soft, more feminine, and that understands that human beings are feeling in nature. They're not just kind of robotic, practical workers. So it's a really good opportunity for us to just spend some time with the nodes as they're completing this journey and really get to grips with what we've learned personally during the time of the eclipses in Cancer and Capricorn. Also, that's going to be activated. We had a beautiful moment last night with the moon connecting up with Venus in Gemini. I hope you saw that because it was gorgeous in the sky last night. As this aspect that I'm talking about is happening, the moon will have moved into Cancer and will be conjunct the nodes, so activating the nodes even more for us. So that's going to be helping to sort of integrate this process for us even more. So really do try and connect with that. The moon is in her waxing phase now. She's growing and she's with the North Node. So this will really assist the process of us moving into the destiny and leaving behind what really hasn't worked for us. So then moving on further into the week, as we get to Thursday, this will be when Mercury is conjunct Uranus, okay? And they're both going to be in a square aspect to the moon, who at this point will have moved round to Leo. So we've got these guys together here, Mercury and Uranus in a square aspect to the moon in Leo. So this could spell a little bit of challenge, or potentially the flip side is that we could really master something quite creative. Essentially what we have here is Mercury, which represents our thoughts, in a challenging placement with Uranus. Uranus is rebellion. Uranus is wanting to do things very, very differently. So it can be, you know, a bit destabilizing. And so you can see both potentialities of that. It can lead to a breakthrough in your thinking, if you'd like to, some real enlightenment, for example. Or it could just be a case of, I'm just going to be quite impulsive. I'm going to be quite controversial with how I think and communicate. In a square aspect to the moon in Leo, Leo does like to be in the spotlight. It is one of the more sort of self-focused signs, essentially. And we need that. You know, we all need to have some focus on ourselves. You know, we have a primary responsibility to ourselves as human beings. So there's no judgment in what I say there at all. But with the moon there, we could sort of, there can be a conflict, essentially, between our feelings, represented by the moon, and our thinking and how we're communicating those to others. There can be like a dissonance, essentially, a challenge of trying to get these two lined up. We've got a fire sign here, and Mercury's in an earth sign. And, you know, they don't really kind of blend, do they? You can't really mix earth and fire. In fact, you use earth to put the fire out, essentially. Pour sand on a fire and it's going to starve it of oxygen. So these two signs, you know, they're not really going to gel with each other. So how this can kind of play out is that you could be a bit preachy. You could be a bit, you know, we still got some of the essence of that Pluto, Jupiter kind of, I need to know everything, I want to know everything, I do know everything kind of thing going on up there. And I think this could tap us into just a little bit more of that kind of flavor. So watch yourself for being a bit pushy with your opinions, for example, or getting a bit preachy, or putting yourself in the spotlight because you feel very strongly about some kind of out there ideas, Uranus, Mercury. Or you think that something that seems to you to be absolutely sheer brilliance, like, oh, this is it, this is the answer to everything, and it just kind of, it's not going to end well if you come too far into the kind of the very passionate, this is a fire sign, if we get too passionate about kind of pushing this, especially with the emotional backing of the moon, if we get kind of too emotionally caught up in this, it can be challenging. So my recommendations, if you're starting to feel this tension as we move into Thursday, I would say with Mercury in square to the moon, what you can do is you could channel this in ways of, Mercury represents the home, and we're all spending a lot of time at home at the moment, like it or not. So this could be a time to get really organized. Mercury, as I said about Gemini, likes things to be ordered and neat and practical. So this could be a good time to do something around the home. Have a big cleanup. Yeah, Mercury likes hygiene and cleanliness. So, you know, have a deep clean. Have a really good, you know, pull all the stuff out of the cupboards, have a really good organize. Something like that. Just channel this energy into a different kind of way rather than getting caught up in yet more kind of heated arguments. Which are rife, and with Uranus, you know, likely to take place in the digital realm, so online again. Watch the social media presence at that time. So yeah, focus it into organizing your home. Pull out the, you know, Taurus is really, with it being a Venus ruled sign, this can be a great time to organize your wardrobe, to clean up all your makeup supplies, to, you know, clean all your shoes. You know, how often do your shoes get some attention? Just do something like that. Just channel it into as Venusian a project as you can, with it being Taurus. Could also be, you know, a time to get to grips with perhaps looking at some correspondence, bills, perhaps with it being Taurus, with it being money related. Just getting that, you know, emphasis moving in a way that you want. Use it or it will use you. That's how astrology influences work. This is why it's so empowering. So yeah, it could also be a time when, because Mercury rules communication, writers could find some really great inspiration as Mercury and Uranus come together, some breakthrough ideas. This could also be a time when, with the moon influence here, would be good for you to just do some of that free writing. If you're feeling like a tension within between your rational and irrational, or between the thinking and the feeling parts of the self, then this can be a great time just to write, and just see what happens, see what comes out of you. You could have some real breakthrough moments in there. So that would be another really great way to channel this energy too. Or having a conversation with someone about your feelings, but someone very grounded who can hold space for whatever comes out of your mouth without judgment. If you're lucky enough to have someone like that in your life, and they agree to do that, then it could be a really great time for you to just kind of offload some of the challenging conflict between thinking and feeling at this time. And you might just want to blurt it all out, you know. That's what Uranus can do. It's just like, oh, I don't care about the rules, I'm just going to say what I need to say. Well, if you're feeling that you need to do that, ask someone to just hold space and help you with that, rather than, you know, directing it at someone and then living to regret it later. As we move on to Friday, then, Venus's day, we're getting to a really interesting point in Venus's journey through Gemini. Now, she's in pre-shadow at the moment, activating the part of your chart between 5 degrees and 21 degrees of Gemini. At 21 degrees, she'll go retrograde. So she's starting to waken things up. And one of the most important aspects that in fact, the most important aspect, I would say, that she's going to make throughout this process is a challenge aspect, another square aspect to Neptune in Pisces. He's currently at 20 degrees of Pisces. So Venus is approaching 20 degrees of Gemini, and so this is an applying aspect that we have. So Venus, we're starting to get pulled into this. What's going to happen, because Neptune is so slow moving, much slower than Venus, we will have the square taking place in this phase, the pre-shadow phase. Then she'll go retrograde and hit the same spot again. Then she'll go direct and hit the same spot for a third time. So we are going to have this aspect 3 times over the course of the Venus retrograde. So it's something to really pay attention to, particularly if you have planets, angles or points around 20 degrees of Gemini and Pisces, or in fact the other mutable signs, which are Virgo and Sagittarius, because they will be creating a square in opposition to these points. So what is Venus in square to Neptune all about? Well, it's an uncomfortable aspect, so it's likely to provoke challenge. And the reason that the planets create challenge for us is that essentially human beings are quite lazy. We're like water. We take the route of least resistance through life. And that doesn't really help us grow. It doesn't help us develop, and it certainly doesn't help us do the soul level work that we were incarnated this time around to do. So every once in a while we need a little push to get us to do the work. And so that's the reason for challenging aspects. The great news with square aspects is that they're difficult, they're irritating, they annoy the hell out of us, but they lead to mastery. And if you can master this, then you are onto a winner. You really, really are. When you master a square aspect, it really, really, really pays you back so much. It's fantastic. You'll actually find that in the charts of most successful people in the world, or what are considered to be successful people, they have lots and lots of squares. So it can prevent, you can look at their charts and think, oh my goodness, you know, so many squares, so many difficulties and challenges, and yet when they overcome them, they just, you know, marvel. So Venus square to Neptune. Venus is all about love and worth and value. Neptune, in a hard aspect, is likely to give us more of the downsides or the less desirable qualities of itself. With Neptune, Neptune is the filter. It's the lens that we look at life through. It likes to, it's kind of a kaleidoscope. It can change all the time. And it can see things not really as they are. So it's our beer goggles. It's our rose-tinted spectacles. It's where we are tricked. It's a mirage. It's any trick of what we're seeing. So essentially, there's a close correlation to trust and betrayal. Things happening that are actually not really what we thought they were. So it's a very confusing kind of influence. In square to Venus, then, this can lead to poor judgments, essentially. We can't really trust ourselves. It's almost like we are drunk. All right, we don't want to be making important decisions about our relationships at this time. They're likely to be misjudged. It's going to be a distortion, potentially lots of disappointments in that area of life, in our love life, or being disillusioned. You know, if we've been living under a kind of a utopian Neptunian bubble of everything's going to be fine, everything's great in the world, you know, the rose-tinted spectacles, then in a hard aspect, they can get ripped off your face and you can really see how things actually are when you're not under the influence. Neptune rules alcohol and drugs, rules any way that we escape reality. Meditation, sleep and dreaming, fantasy, you know, watching movies, fiction, all of these things, taking pictures, you know, everything that changes reality and how we see it. So we can have our rose-tinted glasses kind of taken off at this time, which can lead to real kind of sense of loss, which is also another Neptunian theme. It can make a victim of us, and it can be very disappointing. So it's likely to show up in potentially feelings of low self-esteem. Venus being the ruler of our sense of worth and our sense of personal beauty and desirability and attractiveness. So you can get a real hit of, oh gosh, I feel really bad about myself. I've let myself go during the lockdown. I really need a haircut, any of this. So around these 3 dates that we're going to have, watch out for those feelings coming up within you. Those feelings of loss and sadness and disillusionment about your relationship, your current relationship status, past relationships, because remember, Venus is going to be retrograding, your self-image, your financial status also. Definitely not a good time at all to be making a big purchase or investing money. That's likely to be very poorly judged. I would stay well away from that. And similarly with spending, going out shopping, spending, doing it online, whatever, just give it a wide berth around those days. And beauty treatments as well, not a good idea. It's likely that something will appear to be really good. Oh, this purple hair dye, that looks like that will be a really awesome idea. And then you turn out and it's like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Or this tattoo, or this piercing, or this whatever. So just watch out for misjudging those things and how they appear to you, and avoid disappointment there. As I said, the square aspects give us this opportunity to master that energy. So if you're finding that these things crop up in your personal experience during this time, then this is the perfect invitation for you to do some work with Venus in the retrograde to really rectify, you know, these deep-seated feelings. Neptune is really, really deep. It's one of the outer planets. So it works on us in a much deeper place from within. And it's very sensitive, very emotional sign. So, you know, Venus is helping, and this aspect is helping to kind of wash those things up to the surface so that we can acknowledge them, validate that they actually are down there. You know, it's not just a temporary thing. These have come to the surface because they exist, you know, pushed down the rest of the time. So we could just wait until the feeling goes away, which it will, you know, it's transitory. Or we can say, okay, this has come up to the surface. Perhaps now is a time when I can deal with this once and for all, or do a big, big piece of work towards rectifying it once and for all. So take note of what comes up towards the end of the week with this aspect and see if it's something that you can now finally master. You can make a dedication to yourself that I've had enough of this self-doubt. I've had enough of feeling like I'm not beautiful enough. I've had enough of selling myself short in relationship or trusting the wrong sorts of people, whatever whatever the way it is that you're kind of experiencing this, and say, okay, I'm going to dedicate this Venus retrograde time to doing some work on that and changing that, because Neptune is one of the planets that bring change to us. So it's a fantastic opportunity, and I hope you will put it to good use. On Friday itself, when this first starts to get active, it is softened a little bit by the fact that the moon will have gone into, the moon will be sextiling Venus at that point. Yeah, the fire and air there working well together. As we know, air breathes life into fire. You know, unlike the earth was putting it out, this time we have air oxygenating the fire. So the moon being in Leo still at this time and having a harmonious aspect will soften this off and allow more of a gentle sort of process with it. But then as we move forward, it's going to become more intense on Saturday. And then as we move on to Sunday, the moon will have moved around and will be in Virgo, and that will be creating an opposition. So this is going to be a really, really kind of sensitive time. Virgo, with the moon in Virgo as well, can make us really picky. Virgo has, like I talked about at the beginning, the Mercury aspect of really wanting to know, you know, the finest details. So Virgo can be a little bit critical of faults. And so this could really make us pick at ourselves and our perceived faults, or pick at our relationship or our relationship history or our connection to money and wealth. It could really, you know, be a challenging aspect. So of all the days, I think really it will be Sunday when we're most likely to sort of feel this on a very surface level. The moon operates on a very kind of superficial surface level. So spend some time, if you can, in the coming weekend of doing some of that work on yourself. Avoid, you know, the pitfalls that I've outlined, and hopefully that will keep you on the right path. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, thank you so much for joining me, and please do subscribe. If you're an existing follower, thank you so much for all your support. Remember, I put all sorts of different content out also on my Facebook page that isn't in video format. So if that interests you, then do pop over there and follow me on there as well. Have a beautiful week. Spend your time wisely and be okay with space. Be okay with change. Both of those things are around in bucket loads right now, and don't be in a rush to just fill them with a shape that seems to fit the whole. Lots of love. Take care. Bye.